They said she was washed up, kicked off the Northern Border Patrol for being too soft for real combat. The blonde woman with the quiet eyes and regulation bun sat in the back corner of the briefing room, clutching a simple clipboard while seasoned soldiers whispered about the new logistics support. Her name was Sarah Chen, and to everyone in that testosterone-heavy room, she was just another desk jockey who had somehow wandered into their world of life and death. They saw civilian clothes transitioning to a basic uniform, weathered hands that suggested field experience, and a subtle limp that made her favor her left leg. What they didn't see was the way her eyes automatically scanned room exits and sight lines, or how her fingers tapped in a specific rhythm against her thigh. Before her Border Patrol days, she'd spent years in specialized training that few ever completed, a detail hidden behind layers of classified records. But in the unforgiving desert borderlands, where one mistake means death for the entire team, every member must prove their worth when cartel snipers can strike from miles away. There is no room for the weak, no place for those who cannot pull their weight when bullets start flying and blood begins to spill. The decorated patrol unit that had reluctantly accepted her knew this truth better than most, having lost good soldiers to the razor-sharp precision of enemies who showed no mercy. Yet when the morning mist clears and gunfire erupts across the ridge, this simple support staff will reveal why her call sign was once whispered in legend, and why some secrets are worth more than gold. The desert has a way of stripping away pretense, of revealing what lies beneath the surface when survival depends on split-second decisions and the steady hand of someone who has walked through hell and emerged from the other side. The sterile briefing room at the Northern Border Patrol Training Academy reeked of testosterone and tactical gear oil, where hierarchy was measured in ribbons and respect was earned through blood. Captain Marcus Rodriguez, known to his men as Bulldog, commanded the room with 15 years of desert warfare etched into his weathered face and a chest full of commendations that spoke of battles won and brothers lost. His voice carried the weight of authority as he addressed the assembled unit, their boots echoing on concrete floors while weapons were methodically cleaned and mission patches were displayed like trophies on the walls. The sound of metal on metal, the soft whisper of rifle bolts being cycled, and the low murmur of tactical discussions created a symphony of professional violence that had become as familiar as breathing. Sarah Chen entered this world quietly, her regulation bun pristine and her civilian clothes marking her as an outsider in a realm where camouflage was religion and combat boots were sacraments. She carried nothing more threatening than a clipboard and supply manifest, her assigned role as logistics support placing her firmly in the background of men who lived and breathed the sharp edge of border warfare. The lean build of her frame and the subtle limp that favored her left leg told stories she kept locked away, while her weathered hands spoke of experiences that had nothing to do with inventory management or supply runs. She took her seat in the back corner, eyes downcast, responding with crisp yes sirs and understood when addressed, never making eye contact with the soldiers who measured her worth in glances and found her wanting. Sergeant Tommy Morrison, built like a tank and twice as destructive, served as Rodriguez's right hand and amplified every attitude his captain displayed with the enthusiasm of a man who had never met a fight he couldn't win. The various squad members exchanged those knowing looks that soldiers perfect, the silent communication that labeled her as just another desk jockey who had somehow wandered into their world of life and death. They saw logistics support and assumed incompetence, saw civilian clothes and assumed weakness, saw a woman in a man's world and assumed she would crack under pressure. What they failed to notice was how her eyes automatically cataloged exits and sight lines, how she unconsciously maintained tactical posture, even in relaxation, and how her fingers tapped against her thigh in a rhythm that spelled out Morse code for a call sign they had never heard. A faint, almost imperceptible flicker in Rodriguez's eyes as he glanced at her seemed to suggest a buried memory, a name like Ghost 2-3 almost surfacing before being pushed back down. Rodriguez's briefing was standard procedure, outlining supply runs and equipment maintenance with the casual dismissiveness of a man who had long ago decided that support staff existed to serve real soldiers. Sarah took methodical notes, her pen moving with practiced precision as she recorded details that would keep these men alive in the field, though none of them would ever acknowledge the critical nature of her work. The captain's words carried an edge of condescension as he explained that support staff stayed in the rear, that supplies were her domain while real work belonged to real soldiers. Her only response was a silent nod and the continued scratching of her pen against paper, absorbing every detail while revealing nothing of the storm that raged behind her calm exterior. The assignment briefing mentioned high-risk patrol sector Delta 7, and Sarah's pen stopped mid-sentence when the location was announced. A brief pause that might have meant nothing or might have meant everything. For just a moment, her eyes met Rodriguez's across the room, and something unspoken passed between them. A flicker of recognition that was gone before it could be examined. The captain's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, as if he had glimpsed something familiar in her face, something that triggered a memory he couldn't quite place. The briefing continued, but the atmosphere had changed, charged with the kind of tension that precedes storms in the desert, where the air itself seems to hold its breath before unleashing forces that reshape the landscape. Tomorrow, they would see what the ridge really demanded of them. And in the morning, desert silence, some sounds carry further than others, while some shots are worth more than gold. The desert dawn painted the rocky terrain in shades of amber and blood, as Rodriguez's unit prepared for their field training exercise in Sector Delta 7, where the borderlands stretched endlessly toward horizons that held both promise and peril. The early morning air carried the scent of sage and danger, while tactical gear clinked softly in the pre-dawn darkness as soldiers checked weapons and adjusted equipment with the practiced efficiency of men who knew that preparation meant survival. Sarah Chen stood apart from the group, her assigned pack deliberately loaded with the heaviest and most awkward supplies, extra water containers and medical equipment that would test her endurance on the 12-mile forced march that lay ahead. Rodriguez watched her with calculating eyes, his weathered face showing the kind of cold satisfaction that came from believing he was about to expose weakness where strength was required. Tank Morrison led the verbal assault with the enthusiasm of a man who had never met a fight he couldn't win, his voice carrying across the formation like a challenge thrown down before the gods of war. He spoke of desk jockeys and cafeteria soldiers, of dead weight that would drag down real fighters when the shooting started and blood began to flow. Corporal Jake Stevens, known to his brothers as Diesel, joined the chorus of mockery with jokes about logistics specialists who had never been past the base perimeter, while Private Marcus Thompson, the unit's rookie, followed the group dynamic with the uncertain cruelty of youth trying to prove itself worthy of acceptance. Their words cut through the morning air like shrapnel, designed to wound and expose the soft flesh beneath civilian pretense. Sarah maintained her pace, despite the crushing weight of her pack and the subtle limp that marked some old injury, her breathing steady and controlled, while others began to show the strain of Rodriguez's deliberately punishing tempo. She made no complaints, requested no assistance, and gave no indication that the physical challenge was beyond her capabilities, though sweat beaded on her forehead and her jaw tightened with each step across the unforgiving terrain. The captain increased the pace with the methodical cruelty of a man testing limits, pushing his unit toward the observation post that overlooked the primary smuggling route where cartel scouts moved like ghosts through the desert landscape. His eyes never left Sarah's form, waiting for the moment when she would break and reveal the weakness he was certain lay beneath her quiet exterior. The observation post commanded a sweeping view of the valley below, where heat mirages danced across the sand and shadows provided the only relief from the merciless sun that turned the desert into a furnace of survival. Rodriguez positioned his men with tactical precision, assigning fields of fire and communication protocols while relegating Sarah to the rear with the radio equipment. Her role reduced to that of a passive observer in a world where action determined worth. The captain took his position at the primary overwatch point, his rifle trained on the valley floor where movement might indicate the presence of hostile forces, while his designated marksmen settled into a supporting position that provided overlapping fields of fire. Movement in the valley below caught Rodriguez's attention, and he ordered radio silence as the unit began surveillance of what appeared to be cartel scouts, moving with the practiced caution of men who knew that death stalked the borderlands. Through his scope, he could see armed figures moving between cover, their weapons glinting in the harsh sunlight as they advanced along routes that had been carved by decades of illegal trafficking. What Rodriguez failed to notice was the glint of a sniper scope on the distant ridge, nearly 1,200 meters away, where a cartel marksman was positioning himself for an ambush that would turn the observation post into a killing field. Sarah saw the distant reflection and felt her blood turn to ice as tactical awareness flooded through her consciousness like a dam bursting under pressure. She attempted to signal Rodriguez, but his attention was focused on the valley patrol, and her urgent hand gestures were dismissed with the casual arrogance of a man who believed he understood the tactical situation better than support staff ever could. The distance to the hostile sniper was beyond the range of standard military rifles. The wind conditions were challenging, with 15-mile-per-hour crosswinds and thermal updrafts that would deflect any normal shot, and the time window for action was measured in heartbeats rather than minutes. The squad began to move toward the valley floor, following Rodriguez's orders to advance into what Sarah recognized as a carefully prepared kill zone, where the cartel sniper would have clear fields of fire and no chance of missing his targets. Her internal conflict raged between military protocol that demanded deference to commanding officers and the knowledge that silence meant death for every man in the unit, including soldiers who had spent the morning mocking her competence and questioning her right to stand among them. This was the core of her torment, the survivor's guilt that clawed at her, telling her that stepping back into the fray would only lead to more loss, more pain. The memory of a gun in her hand, the chilling accuracy, the inevitable blood, it sickened her. She had initially refused to even train with a firearm after Afghanistan, a self-imposed exile from the weapon that had become both her salvation and her curse. Yet, the burning certainty that she possessed the skills to save these men warred with her deep-seated desire to remain hidden, to never again pick up a rifle after the horrors of Afghanistan. For a moment, her hand hovered over her pack, her fingers brushing against the cold metal of her modified rifle. She had sworn it would remain there, a relic of a past she desperately wanted to forget. But the distant glint, the subtle shift in the wind, the almost imperceptible click of a bolt, these primal instincts screamed at her, overriding the carefully constructed walls she had built around her warrior self. The moment of choice arrived with the sound of a rifle bolt being cycled in the distance, barely audible over the wind, but unmistakable to ears trained to recognize the signature of impending violence. Sarah reached for her backup rifle, the weapon that appeared standard issue to casual observation, but concealed modifications that spoke of precision work and specialized ammunition, designed for extreme range shooting. Her breathing changed, becoming the controlled rhythm of a predator preparing to strike, while her body shifted into a combat stance that transformed her from logistics support into something altogether more dangerous. Tank Morrison noticed her positioning first, his mockery dying on his lips as he saw her assume a prone position that spoke of training far beyond what any supply clerk should possess, her movements economical and precise as she adjusted her scope for range and wind compensation. What would you do if everyone underestimated you while lives hung in the balance? Rodriguez turned to reprimand her just as the distant sound of a rifle shot echoed across the valley. But it was not the shot he expected to hear. For the first time, the captain noticed her modified equipment and specialized ammunition, the subtle differences that marked her rifle as something far more sophisticated than standard military issue, and the confusion in his eyes was matched by the stunned silence of his unit, who had never seen logistics support move with such lethal precision or demonstrate the kind of tactical awareness that separated elite soldiers from ordinary troops. The shot that saved them all was just the beginning, because legends are not born in training rooms but forged in moments when silence becomes action and the true nature of warriors is revealed through fire and blood rather than words and boasts. The echo of that impossible shot hung in the desert air like a prayer answered by death itself, while 1,200 meters away, a cartel sniper's body crumpled behind his rifle, his fingers still poised on a trigger that would never fire again. The silence that followed was not the absence of sound, but the presence of something far more profound, the kind of quiet that descends when legends step out of shadows and into the harsh light of truth. Rodriguez stood frozen in his command position, his weathered face a mask of confusion and dawning recognition as he stared at the woman who had just accomplished what should have been impossible, with equipment that appeared standard issue but concealed secrets that spoke of wars fought in places where silence was survival and precision meant the difference between heroes and ghosts. Tank Morrison's mockery died on his lips as he watched Sarah maintain her prone position, her breathing controlled and methodical, while her modified rifle remained trained on the distant ridge where death had been delivered with surgical precision. The big sergeant's eyes moved from her weapon to her face, searching for some explanation that would make sense of what he had witnessed, but finding only the cold professionalism of someone who had walked through hell and emerged carrying skills that most soldiers could only dream of possessing. China sorted through the weapons and took up position. Diesel Stevens felt his stomach turn as he realized that the woman they had been mocking all morning had just saved every life in the unit, while Rookie Thompson stared with triumphant wonder of youth, confronted with excellence so far beyond his comprehension that it might as well have been magic. The immediate and complete trust from the team wasn't just about the shot, but the unwavering calm in her demeanor, the efficient way she secured her weapon, and the subtle shift in her posture that screamed competence and control. She hadn't boasted, hadn't hesitated, she had simply acted, and that quiet, decisive action commanded an authority far greater than any rank. The distant sound of rotor blades cutting through the morning air announced the arrival of Colonel James Patterson, whose helicopter appeared over the ridge like a mechanical angel descending from the heavens to bear witness to miracles performed by mortals who had been forgotten by the world they had served. Rodriguez attempted to regain control of the situation, his voice carrying the desperate authority of a man who felt the ground shifting beneath his feet as he demanded explanations for actions that defied everything he thought he knew about the quiet woman who had been relegated to logistics support. But Patterson's weathered face showed no surprise as he stepped from the aircraft, his eyes immediately finding Sarah's position with the familiarity of a commander who had seen this particular brand of impossible before. The colonel's voice carried across the observation post with the weight of absolute authority as he spoke words that would shatter every assumption Rodriguez and his men had built about the woman they had dismissed as dead weight. Ghost 23 was not just a call sign but a legend, whispered in the corridors of military command, a name associated with missions that existed only in classified files and the memories of those who had been privileged to witness perfection in action. Sarah Chen was not logistics support who had wandered into their world of violence, but a predator who had chosen to hide among sheep because the alternative was to remember what it felt like to be the most dangerous person in any room she entered. Patterson's testimony unfolded like pages torn from a classified manual, each revelation more stunning than the last, as he spoke of a woman who had held impossible positions against overwhelming odds and emerged victorious through a combination of skill, determination, and the kind of raw talent that appeared perhaps once in a generation. 127 confirmed kills at ranges that pushed the boundaries of what physics would allow, 15 high-value targets eliminated in operations that had shaped the course of conflicts most civilians would never know had been fought. The Silver Star and Bronze Star with Valor device were not just decorations but acknowledgments of actions that had saved hundreds of lives and altered the trajectory of battles that would have been lost without her intervention. The truth about Operation Desert Viper emerged like a confession torn from the depths of classified shame, a mission that had gone wrong not through Sarah's failure, but through the kind of political maneuvering that sacrificed good soldiers on the altar of bureaucratic convenience. 18 months ago, her 8-man team had been ambushed during a deep reconnaissance mission in Afghanistan, pinned down on an exposed ridge by Taliban fighters who had turned what should have been a routine intelligence-gathering operation into a 72-hour nightmare of sustained combat. Sarah had provided overwatch from a position that should have been suicide, eliminating 23 hostiles while her team fought for survival against odds that should have meant death for everyone involved. The IED explosion during extraction had been the final cruel twist in a mission that had already cost too much. Shrapnel tearing through her left leg while she carried a wounded teammate half a mile through hostile territory under continuous fire. 6 of her brothers had died in that hellish landscape, their sacrifice hidden behind walls of classification, while she became the scapegoat for a political system that needed someone to blame for an operation that had been doomed from the moment it was conceived. The forced retirement and medical discharge had been presented as mercy, but Sarah knew the truth. She had been sacrificed to protect the reputations of men who had never heard a shot fired in anger. Rodriguez felt the weight of his misjudgment settling on his shoulders like a physical burden as he stared at the woman who had absorbed his contempt with the quiet dignity of someone who had nothing left to prove to anyone. The morning's mockery seemed not just cruel but criminally ignorant, the kind of blindness that cost lives and dishonored the very principles that military service was supposed to represent. Tank Morrison's face had gone pale as he realized that his casual cruelty had been directed at someone who had forgotten more about combat than he would ever learn, while Diesel Stevens wondered how many other legends walked among them unrecognized, their true worth hidden behind the mundane facades of routine assignments. The modified rifle in Sarah's hands told its own story of preparation for wars that might never come, custom modifications that spoke of someone who understood that the difference between life and death often came down to equipment that performed beyond standard specifications. The 338 Lapua Magnum grounds were not standard military issue but precision instruments designed for the kind of extreme-range work that separated elite operators from ordinary soldiers. While the military-grade optics could resolve targets at distances that would make lesser marksmen weep with envy. What would you do if you discovered that the person you had been mocking possessed skills that could save your life? Patterson's explanation of the impossible shot that had just been executed served as a masterclass in the kind of tactical excellence that most soldiers would never witness, much less comprehend. 1,200 meters with a 15-mile-per-hour crosswind and thermal updrafts that would deflect any ordinary projectile, executed with the kind of mathematical precision that required not just skill, but an understanding of physics that bordered on the supernatural. The fact that she had made the shot while under emotional stress, surrounded by men who had spent the morning questioning her competence, only added to the legend that was being born in the desert's silence. But legends are built on more than single moments of excellence, and as the squad began to understand the magnitude of what they had witnessed, they also began to comprehend the deeper tragedy of a warrior who had been forced to hide her true nature behind the facade of mundane support duties. The slight tremor in Sarah's hands as she secured her weapon spoke of trauma that went deeper than physical wounds, the kind of psychological damage that came from surviving when better men had died, and being blamed for losses that were beyond anyone's control to prevent. The storm breaks. The radio crackled to life with the harsh static of emergency communications, Patterson's voice cutting through the desert silence like a blade as he reported multiple hostile contacts converging on their position from 3 different directions. The morning's single sniper had been merely the advance scout for a much larger force, 30-plus cartel fighters moving with the disciplined precision of men who had turned border warfare into a profitable science and knew that American military units represented both threat and opportunity. Rodriguez felt his stomach drop as he realized that their observation post had become a trap, their elevated position offering excellent fields of fire but no viable escape routes, as heavily armed enemies closed the distance with RPGs and mounted machine guns that could turn their rocky sanctuary into a killing field. Tank Morrison's transformation from mockery to desperate respect was complete, as he turned to Sarah with the kind of raw honesty that only impending death could inspire, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had finally understood that survival depended not on pride, but on recognizing excellence wherever it might be found. The big sergeant's apology came in short, clipped sentences that revealed more about his character than hours of conversation ever could, acknowledging that he had been wrong about everything that mattered, and asking for guidance from someone whose tactical knowledge had been proven in the crucible of combat. Diesel Stevens abandoned his earlier skepticism entirely, requesting specific instructions about defensive positions, while rookie Thompson watched with the fascination of youth, confronted with the kind of professional competence that existed only in movies and the memories of old soldiers. Sarah's internal conflict played out across her weathered features like a war being fought in real time. Flashbacks to Operation Desert Viper mixing with present tactical realities as she struggled to reconcile her desire to never carry a rifle again with the mathematical certainty that silence meant death for every man in the unit. The survivor's guilt that had driven her into hiding warred with the professional training that had kept her alive through missions that should have been impossible, while her hands moved with unconscious precision to check equipment and assess angles of fire that would determine whether they lived or died in the next 15 minutes. Patterson's command decision to place her in tactical control represented both vindication and burden, the kind of responsibility that she had tried to escape but could never truly abandon. The counterattack plan that emerged from Sarah's tactical assessment was a masterclass in the kind of asymmetrical warfare that turned disadvantages into strengths through superior knowledge and disciplined execution. She identified 3 concealed firing positions that would allow her to move between locations while maintaining overlapping fields of fire, using the terrain knowledge gained from previous missions to create the illusion of a much larger defensive force. Each squad member received specific assignments that played to their individual strengths while contributing to an integrated defense that would maximize their limited firepower against an enemy that possessed superior numbers and heavier weapons. The battle began with a kind of precision that separated trained soldiers from armed civilians, Sarah's first shots eliminating 2 RPG teams at 400 meters, while her voice remained calm and controlled as she directed the squad's defensive fire through hand signals and whispered commands. Her movement between positions was ghost-like, appearing and disappearing among the rocks with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to become invisible when visibility meant death. The psychological impact on the attacking cartel forces was immediate and devastating, their aggressive advance faltering as precision fire from unknown positions began to thin their ranks with surgical efficiency. Rodriguez watched with growing amazement as Sarah orchestrated a defense that should have been impossible, her quiet commands transforming his disparate unit into a cohesive fighting force that responded to her leadership with the kind of trust that could only be earned through demonstrated competence. The captain's own tactical knowledge, honed through 15 years of border warfare, told him that their position was hopeless against the odds they faced. But Sarah's calm professionalism and precise execution began to shift the balance of the engagement in ways that defied conventional military wisdom. Tank Morrison followed her instructions with the enthusiasm of a convert, his heavy machine gun providing suppressive fire that allowed her to relocate between positions, while maintaining pressure on enemies who had expected to face confused and frightened Americans, rather than a coordinated defense led by someone who understood their tactics better than they understood themselves. The turning point came when Sarah's tactical brilliance began to pay dividends in enemy casualties that mounted with each passing minute. 12 confirmed kills in 20 minutes of sustained combat that forced the cartel fighters to reassess their assumptions about the opposition they faced. Her ability to anticipate enemy movements and position herself accordingly transformed what should have been a massacre into a disciplined withdrawal, the attacking force retreating in confusion as they realized that they had engaged not a routine border patrol, but something far more dangerous. The squad's growing respect for her abilities was matched by their amazement at witnessing the kind of combat excellence that existed only in legend. Rodriguez's admission that he had never seen anything like her performance, serving as both apology and recognition of tactical genius. The aftermath of the engagement left the squad in a protective circle around Sarah, their defensive positions maintained even as the immediate threat receded, because they had learned to trust her judgment in matters of life and death. Rodriguez's report to command would emphasize that Chen had saved all their lives multiple times over, his recommendation for her permanent assignment to his unit representing a complete reversal of his earlier dismissive attitude. Patterson's pride in his former subordinate was evident in his voice as he spoke of the soldier he remembered, the warrior who had been hidden behind administrative assignments and bureaucratic prejudice until circumstances demanded that legend step forward once again. Have you ever witnessed someone transform from underestimated to indispensable in a single moment? Sarah's quiet tears after the adrenaline crash spoke to the emotional cost of excellence, the burden of carrying skills that could save lives but came with memories that made sleep difficult and peace elusive. The squad's spontaneous salute was more than military courtesy, but genuine recognition of someone who had proven that heroism often walked among them unrecognized, wearing the mundane uniforms of support personnel while carrying the skills that separated survival from catastrophe. Tank Morrison's declaration that Ghost 2-3 was back represented more than nickname revival but acknowledgement that some legends were too valuable to remain hidden, while Diesel Stevens and Rookie Thompson made promises that spoke to the kind of loyalty that could only be earned through actions that saved lives and honored sacrifice. 6 months passed like seasons in the desert, where time moved differently. The elite counterterrorism unit at Fort Braxton had become a brotherhood forged in the crucible of respect. Sarah Chen no longer sat in the back corners of briefing rooms, but instead commanded the tactical center, where her quiet voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Rodriguez had requested her permanent assignment to his unit, his recommendation a confession of past blindness and present clarity, while Patterson's endorsement opened doors that had been closed by prejudice. The morning briefing room at Fort Braxton hummed with a different energy, where respect was now measured in competence rather than ribbons. Sarah entered with the same quiet dignity, but now her presence commanded immediate attention from soldiers who had learned to recognize the difference between empty noise and the silence that preceded precision. Her modified rifle case rested against the wall like a sacred artifact, its contents known to every man in the room as the instrument through which impossible shots became reality. Tank Morrison, whose mockery had once filled the air, now stood when she entered, his massive frame offering deference. Rodriguez called the room to attention with a voice that carried new understanding about command. and the recognition that true leadership sometimes came from those who spoke least and accomplished most. The mission briefing outlined a high-value target elimination that would require precision shooting, an international arms dealer whose continued existence threatened regional stability. The target would be moving through an urban environment where civilian casualties were unacceptable and the margin for error was measured in millimeters. Sarah listened with methodical attention, her pen moving across paper as she calculated angles and compensations. The squad that had once dismissed her now hung on her every word. Diesel Stevens requested specific guidance about Overwatch positions, his questions revealing a tactical sophistication that had grown through exposure to someone who understood warfare as both art and science. Rookie Thompson, now seasoned, demonstrated professional competence from learning from the best. The unit's performance metrics had become legendary within the military community. 15 successful missions with 0 casualties. The target location presented insurmountable challenges for conventional marksmen. An 18-story urban environment where wind shear and heat distortion created changing conditions. Sarah's position on the rooftop provided a clear line of sight, but the 1,800-meter range through atmospheric conditions meant success depended on precision that transcended normal human limitations. The 30-second window during which the target would be exposed required timing that left no room for hesitation, and political implications meant the mission's success would be measured in international consequences. Rodriguez's voice carried absolute confidence as he spoke the words that had become ritual, granting permission for the shot that would either cement her legend or add another tragic chapter to a story that had already contained too much loss. Sarah's response was the same silent nod that had become her signature, economical movements that conserved energy for the moment when precision would matter more than words. Her breathing shifted into the controlled rhythm that preceded perfect shots, muscle memory taking over as conscious thought gave way to trained instinct. The shot that followed was almost perfection. Her first projectile, a whisper of wind direction miscalculation, impacted 5 centimeters wide of the target, shattering a window and sending a spray of glass into the street. A gasp went through the observation team, but before the echo of the near miss could even fade, Sarah's eyes recalibrated, her hands made a minute, imperceptible adjustment to the scope, and the second shot, a fraction of a second later, found its mark with surgical accuracy. The target was eliminated, leaving no room for political complications or civilian casualties from the corrected shot. The mission's success was measured in the quiet satisfaction from a job done perfectly. Sarah's methodical equipment breakdown serving as the only acknowledgement. Rodriguez's after-action report would recommend her for the Distinguished Service Cross, though they all knew that her true reward lay not in medals, but in the respect of those who had witnessed excellence. The military honors that followed were accepted with the same quiet dignity, Sarah's brief acceptance speech consisting of 4 words that summarized her philosophy about service and sacrifice. The true recognition came from peer respect that acknowledged her transformation, while her tactical innovations were incorporated into training manuals. The squad's loyalty had become absolute, their protective instincts extending into brotherhood. The arrival of new recruits 6 months later created a perfect circle of irony, fresh faces carrying the same prejudices that had once defined the unit's attitude. Sarah took her position in the back of the briefing room with the same understated presence. Rodriguez and the veteran squad members exchanged knowing glances that spoke of shared understanding about the nature of worth. The whispered comments about support staff carried the same dismissive tone that had once characterized their own blindness, creating a sense of historical repetition that would either educate or humiliate. The desert had taught them all that silence often carried more weight than words, that legends were built through actions rather than boasts. Sarah's rifle case rested against the wall like a promise of excellence waiting to be revealed, while her call sign patch, Ghost 23, now worn with pride rather than hidden in shame, served as a symbol of redemption. The cycle would continue as it always had, with new faces learning the same lessons about judgment and recognition that had transformed mockers into believers. In the desert silence where respect was earned, one shot at a time, legends lived not in the stories told about them, but in the quiet moments when steady hands and calm hearts transformed the impossible into reality. As the new recruits filed out, full of eager questions about the unit's legendary precision, Sarah lingered. She walked over to Rodriguez's desk, a simple transfer request form already filled out in her hand. Her eyes met his, a quiet understanding passing between them. "Logistics needs good people, Captain," she said, her voice barely a whisper, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. And I prefer quiet. Rodriguez simply nodded, a knowing look on his face, understanding that some warriors chose their battles and their peace on their own terms.
Mình biết rằng có nhiều bạn nam đang theo dõi series này. Mình là Daisy và mình tin rằng hiểu được câu chuyện của người phụ nữ sẽ giúp chúng ta trở thành một người đàn ông tốt hơn. A Simple Woman, subscribe để khám phá nội tâm phong phú này nhé.